Thanks for checking out today's episode of The Experience Curve, where we explore the personal journeys of accomplished individuals, breaking down the steps they took to get where they are, which I hope just might inspire you on your own path forward. Today, I'm joined by Rick Mayo, the visionary founder and CEO of Alloy Personal Training. With a career spanning over 3 decades, Rick's not only transformed countless lives through his innovative approach to fitness, but's also left an indelible mark on the world of entrepreneurship. From humble beginnings in 1992, where Rick opened his first personal training studio, to pioneering the Alloy Personal Training franchise system, his journey is one of relentless passion, unwavering determination, and unparalleled success. Along the way, Rick has amassed a wealth of knowledge and experience, becoming a sought-after speaker, advisor, and thought leader in the fitness industry. We explored the pivotal moments, hard-earned lessons, and invaluable insights in his career. His innovative business strategies and dedication to customer satisfaction offer invaluable lessons drawn from years of hands-on entrepreneurship. Rick's insights are sure to inspire, fuel your creativity, and guide you on the path to success. Thank you again for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Listen, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I always start right with people in the beginning. For you, that was 1992. What was going on in your life at that point, and what sort of sparked you into this entrepreneurship, the interest in being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, strangely, it doesn't sound like the impetus for entrepreneurship, but it's really just convenience. So I was paying my way through school, working as a personal trainer, and I was having to, it was sort of the infancy of the industry. And so at that point in time, I was going to people's homes, and I had negotiated, a situation with a couple of different health clubs that really had me traveling, all over the north of Atlanta, which is where we're still located. And it just wasn't very convenient. And so, it was a novel idea like, hey, what would it be like if we put 4 walls and a great customer experience around this relatively new service, which was personal training? And that was the birth of the first, I mean, it's certainly in Atlanta, one of, if not the first, you know, physical brick and mortar facilities dedicated to just the service of personal training. So it's really just, can I not have to travel around, right, while I pay for college with this sort of what I didn't think would turn out to be a career, but this sort of side hustle, if you will. And that was the reason that we started the business originally.
Was it something for you in college that you'd always been into health and fitness, or was it something where you felt like, hey, I can make more money doing this than I could maybe waiting tables at a restaurant kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it was something that came easy to me. It involved people, which I always enjoyed. And I think like a lot of people that might be listening, you start exercising maybe in your teenage years for sports or whatever, and then maybe then you're trying to pick up a mate after that, right? And you're trying to look good or whatever those things are. And of course, it evolves in the industry, and all the reasons to exercise have certainly evolved beyond just the aesthetic reasons. But at the time, it was just something I really enjoyed. It was a hobby, and I knew it would help people, and it was fun to help people and get paid well to do so. And you got to socialize at the same time. And so it's sort of all my favorite things packaged into an interesting service. And it turns out it was really easy to do. It was one of those things where I probably would do it for free, if I wouldn't get paid, but just so happened you could actually get paid pretty well also. And so that was it. And to your point, I had been a bartender and a bar back and waited tables and done a few other things. And some of those things at the same time as when I first started training. And it's just a much healthier environment, to be in a, again, a health club environment or a physical facility versus, working late nights at a bar and things like that. So yeah, it had all the fun things of bartending without the bad parts of all the alcohol and lifestyle.
Yeah,
So yeah, I
yeah,
really enjoyed it.
yeah. Because hours are different, right? And some of these personal,
Right.
it'd be 6 a.m. versus ending your night
4
at
a.m.
6 a.m.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
kind of,
Ending your evening at 6 a.m. Yeah, totally different
yeah.
ballgame.
Your next step from there, is it taking on clients like one on one, and then okay, I'm gonna like I have enough of a base, I'm gonna open up a facility. Like, can you walk me through that and how that came about?
Sure. I mean, it wasn't really an industry, so I can imagine, or I can remember, I should say, approaching like a basic health club and saying, "Hi," it sounds crazy now, but like, "Hi, I'm a personal trainer," and they're kind of like, "Man, what does that mean? Like, what do you do?" And they just sold memberships. They didn't have like other services that they would sell. And you'd explain, well, like people pay me for accountability and design programs. I'm like, all right, do what you want, like have at it. And it started out just putting like a basic sign up sheet, like, are you looking for some coaching and some help? Put your name and phone number here. And it was just like pre cell phones. And so a little bit less creepy. But people would sign up and I just call my list and meet them for a free consultation, tell them what I did. And, they would buy packages of sessions back then. And that's sort of the way that we built it. And then you start to get referrals, right? I mean, just basic business 101. Ask for referrals, friends, family, spouses, that type of thing. A lot of it was built based on that. I mean, there was no real digital marketing at the time. And of course, you could like take out an ad somewhere, but there weren't a lot of, other than newspapers and things like that, there weren't a lot of places where an individual coach with a relatively small marketing budget, would go and then advertise for their services. So it was all referral driven, which is great. I mean, it's still the best source of new business for even for our franchisees at this point. So it wasn't a bad way to build a business. You just, again, at the time that was it. And I didn't need as many customers if I was training them myself and it was all one-on-one based training, especially at first when I was traveling around. I mean, I could maybe see 4 or 5 people a day and that was it, right? Before we opened the physical facility. So yeah, that's how we built it. It was just literally word of mouth and some funky creative marketing strategies based on whatever technology we had available to us at the time.
Okay, so then when you're kind of building up your client base, right, and you decide to open this, obviously finances come into play, concerns of like, okay, like I'm going to take this plunge into opening up, right? So how did you sort of manage that psychological aspect or and financial when you're going to open up your first facility?
Yeah, I think, one of the advantages of opening so young is that I really didn't have a lot of risk. I mean, my downside could easily be mitigated. It wasn't like I was putting up my life savings and I was, but it wasn't a significant amount of money. And I was really young, so you have so much time to recover, if you miss. And so, yeah, it was certainly there was some risk tolerance involved inherently, but at the same time, it was not an obscene amount of money. And had it not worked, it wouldn't have ruined me because I was still in my second year of college. So it's like, well, I mean, why not take a shot at this thing, right? It is a little bit of cash, but I can always recoup that on the back end. And I really had no aspirations at the time of doing it as a career. I didn't even think it was possible, quite honestly. It was just, again, a convenient way to put people in 4 walls, create a customer experience. And, you had to explain what it was at the time when people would say, like, what do you do? What is it that you do? It was, again, mostly referral driven, even with the new brick and mortar, but you'd be like, well, you pay me and I build an exercise program and I hold you accountable. And everyone's like, oh, okay, how much is that? I mean, it was just a really interesting time to think back on it now because it's such a commonplace for everybody's like, I need to get in shape. I need to hire a trainer. I mean, everybody knows what that means now, right? But at the time, it was not that way. And so, but overall, just very low barrier as far as financially to get into it. And so it was signing a lease, it was guaranteeing a lease, it was putting down money because I was young and I didn't have a super steady income, at least like a W-2. So I had to put down a significant deposit at the time, in addition to the fact that, you had to buy equipment and just the startup cost of a business. But when I look back on it now, it was so insignificant as far as the amount versus maybe what it would cost these days. Yeah, it's almost laughable. So I quite honestly can't even put myself into what my mindset was like back then. But I don't ever remember feeling like, oh my gosh, this is such a huge risk. I don't want to take it. It was just like, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, honestly, it's not that much money. If I swing and miss, I'll have plenty of time to get back on my feet because I'm 22 years old, right?
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, when you're younger, there's a lot of more time, like you said, to kind of
Yeah,
work out all those
right.
potential issues you might have. But are there people that you're leaning on to kind of help you in the beginning, in the sense of getting the business together? Like, did you hire a receptionist or other trainers that had similar offerings as yourself, or was it just a sort of DIY operation in the beginning?
I think it was a little bit of both. So I did have some contacts in the industry from working in the industry for a while. And so I just pooled my resources as far as who I knew in my network that I could bring in as like, hey, do you want to come here? This is a novel idea. You can do the same thing you're doing at Gold's Gym, but you can come and do it at my facility, right? I don't think we made them employees early on. As a matter of fact, I know we did not, which is a huge no-no now. But at the time, I didn't know any better. And it was much easier just to make them what we called, like 1099s or subcontractors, right? So the customer would pay me, and then I would pay the coach a percentage of that. And so yeah, I mean, it's a lot of folks still do it that way. I don't recommend it, but that's what we did at the time. And so it was really just cobbling together my own resources, friends, The SBA was a decent resource and still is, from what I understand, for people, not necessarily for funding, which it can be that as well. But for me, they just had so many resources. So I think I found a mentor through a program that the SBA was running on entrepreneurship. And so it was just an older guy who had done a bunch of businesses, who was just volunteering his time because he loved entrepreneurship. And it was just really interesting to sit down with someone like that. And you've got this sort of goal and these ideas, and they sort of they ask you really great questions, right? And sort of lead you to the answers with really good questions. And I think looking back on it, that was really invaluable because it just put on the right set of lenses to approach owning a business and being an entrepreneur. And he really never really gave me any advice other than to just ask me really relevant questions, and the answers forced me into the right conclusions ultimately. But yeah, I think SBA was a great free resource. It still is for a lot of people, in addition to just having worked in the industry. So I could just pool again my resources just through the contacts that I already had.
That's good to know, right? So having someone who doesn't really have that specific background in health and fitness, but he has that, business mindset when you're kind of getting started. And it's sort of not the Wild West, but again, before apps and technology and digital, this and that, kind of checking people into gyms. You're kind of in a situation where not that it's a blank canvas, but it seemed like it was a kind of a system where things were just here's what it is. You just sign up and you come and work out at your own pace, where you're kind of coming in with this new approach, but it's also like, how do I think of it now that I'm in it as a business? And through that, right, as you start growing, are there people where you hit certain, maybe it's a financial goal, maybe it's a number of customers where you start saying, okay, this thing is starting to get bigger than I can handle. And you say, okay, I need to bring people on. What was that point, and what did you sort of do in that circumstance?
Yeah, I think, looking back on it, we were adding like ancillary services for additional income. Like, I think we had massage therapy at the time. We had a dietitian on the staff. So you would just stack resources and, like, for lack of better terms, for our customers based on the common goal of our customer avatar. And then you look for like back office help, right? So like to your point, you hire someone to work the front desk or do like admin work, and you'll laugh at this, Joe. So I was trying to think, like, how did we run a personal training business where you were selling essentially sessions, right, at the time? And like, how would we keep track of that? And we had this really archaic system that was hilarious when I think back on it. But do you remember the old like paper cutters that had like a huge like lever arm and it would come down and cut like sliced paper, right?
My daughter's school actually uses yeah.
That's great. I can't
Still
believe you're
have
still
them.
in commission.
Yeah.
Watch your fingers. Yeah. So
Yep.
we would print like colored sheets of like, we called it Monopoly money. And so like if you were buying like a pack of 10, that was like blue. And then we would, cut them into these little packages and put them into packs of 10. And we lock them in the filing cabinet. And it was like, those were like basically funny money, but they were real money. And so when someone would buy, say 10 sessions, they would get an envelope that would have their pack of 10 sessions in it. It's like, don't lose those no matter what. And then when they would come in and work out, they would redeem that with a coach. And then the coach's payroll after 2 weeks would be to turn in all of their vouchers, right? And we would count them up and reconcile them. And then that would be payroll, right? Which was just a wacky system, but there wasn't software for personal training at the time. So it was kind of like a archaic but effective system. It was always a disaster if someone like lost their 24 pack envelope. I'm like, we were trying to keep track in a sort of ledger book, if you will. So those kind of things I needed help with because I was still mainly working on, as a technician, like on the floor, working with customers and managing the coaches that we had. And I really didn't want to be, counting Monopoly money or, cutting up paper in the back office. So it wasn't the best use of my time, so to speak. So we hired that stuff out immediately. So yeah, that was about it. It was like ancillary services that would service the same customer base and allow us to, prop up our profitability a bit. In addition, just back office help was the first thing that I and also didn't enjoy it. There's certain things you're good at, certain things you're not. Finance and all those things I was fine with, but it was a very simple business. There wasn't a ton of time to be spent on like paying bills and whatnot. So it was really about just office back functions and stuff I just did not enjoy at all. And I hired that out immediately.
Yeah, I think that's where people probably decide where they're going to grow first is like, okay, the things that maybe feel heavy to them or the things that are, they just generally don't like. And for you, right, you knew what that was. So when you're sort of growing in that space of time, right? And you're saying, okay, I'm kind of getting I'm getting new customers. I'm bringing on other trainers. I'm sort of taking tasks off me. Was it more about, in your mind, the growth of how do I make more money? Or was it like, how do I get more time back in my life? I don't know if you were at that time, to thinking of starting a family, whatever it might be that was going on. What was more of the drive at that point? Was it the time or making more money?
I think originally it was making more money because not soon after. And look, early stages, like, who did personal training when we first opened? It was like, I was Madonna's trainer. I trained Usher. I mean, those are the type of customers we had early on. It was like only the cool kids were doing it, right? Then it sort of
Mhm.
evolved past that, where it's like just people were like, "Hey, we became known as like a weight loss solution, or anything you need for health and fitness." So once the cool kids kind of weren't the only ones doing it, then it was like, okay, I got married and had kids, so I had a mortgage now, a kid. I'm married. It's like, okay, I need to make more money. And so I didn't mind working and I still really enjoyed the work. So the first order of business was more money, right? To support a family. And then eventually you start to realize, okay, you want to buy some of your time back. And you have to stack skills as well, right? This whole long entrepreneurial journey is about like, stacking skills so that you earn yourself a better opportunity vehicle. So one of those skills may be like, how do you buy back time? Like what does that really mean? How do you get bandwidth in a business and how do you do it and still stay profitable? Once you develop that skill, then your opportunity vehicle can improve a bit, right? And so that's sort of the dance of entrepreneurship from then until now is like, okay, you have to upskill yourself to earn the right to have a better opportunity vehicle. And so that was the first step, I think, was to say, well, first I can make more money by just doing more of the thing I'm doing. That's not super scalable long term because to your point, I'd be working till 9 o'clock at night, go home, crawl in the kid's bed, read them a book, and then fall asleep with them, in the bed, like still in my work clothes because I was exhausted. But that's okay. That's how you learn to make the sausage, so to speak. And then once you do that, you're like, okay, I need to buy some of this time back. So I don't want to work evenings anymore. So what is that going to take? It's like, well, then I'm going to need more customers because I make less margin when paying someone else to service said customers. And so you just sort of put it together over time. That's like a 33-year journey. So that probably that work schedule to earn more money probably was the first 5 or so years, and then it started to be. Then we had another child, so it's like, all right, I need to start buying back some time. Then you start figuring out how to leverage, other people's, talents to help you make money. But it takes a minute, right? It really does. Because at first you just learn to do the thing and then you just do more of the thing. And that's the way you make more money. And then it's like, okay, wait, I have to figure out a different way to make more money without doing just more of the work itself. And that's a skill in and of itself, I think, for most people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that time, as you get older, like you said, time is 100%. I feel more valuable than. I mean, of course, if your business is not doing well, the money is it. That's the situation you're in. But for most people, it's to get that time back. How about like marketing? In the beginning, like you said, it was word of mouth. But as you're growing and technology is evolving, how are you taking that on? Are you personally involved marketing your personal brand logos? I would imagine at some point it was, okay, now we need a website. Now we need whatever marketing initiatives you're kind of putting together. How involved are you in those, and how did they sort of evolve over time?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as technology evolved, marketing changed quite a bit. So it went, buying small newspaper ads in the local paper, right? Because we're only going to draw from a certain radius as a single brick and mortar at the time. You might buy something in the neighborhood program that would go out to one of the big neighborhoods that has super, wealthy homes in it that's nearby because that's our customer base. Started out with that, and then as digital, like you mentioned, websites, and then certainly evolving into like social media marketing. I mean, yes, I mean, and that's probably an area that's still to this day I'm most involved in is the marketing side, and it's just important. I think everyone struggles to market their business, and you have to be able to leverage whatever technologies are available to do that. And you're just basically going where the eyeballs are, really. So early on, there wasn't digital, so we went where the eyeballs were. That were, again, target-rich environments for our customer avatar. Now it's certainly vastly different, and there's been a million stages of that. So it's really just about keeping your eyes open and understanding the technologies that are available to you, which ones are relevant, and taking advantage of those. And as you know, it's an ever-changing environment. I can remember the early days of Facebook marketing being like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right? You could spend not a lot of money, get really inexpensive leads, and they were great leads, right? and all the geo-targeting and all the tools that were put together for you were amazing. Well, it's a different landscape now, right? Now it's a little bit trickier and there's more noise out there and everyone's doing it. And so I think it's ever evolving, right? And so the key is just to like use the best tools available to you at the time that will put you in front of as many eyeballs that fit your customer avatar as possible. And certainly between 1992 and now, it's completely different, but it's also not, right? It's also the same. It's just a different vehicle for the information. But the information and what you're trying to, portray with that information, like, hey, you're on fire, I have water, right? That's the message. You're trying to solve a problem, and you're going to use whatever medium puts you in front of the most eyeballs that you possibly can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, most marketing is, you get TV, your print, your radio, right? You have a couple mediums you can utilize to market, but there's not many. They're all kind of the same, but you're repurposing and just kind of innovating within those same realms that most people have been used to forever. But as you go, right now, as Alloy's growing, right? How do you like I would imagine at some point you'd have competition starting. Maybe in the beginning, like you said, it was just gold and you're kind of at this new approach of coming to people saying like, hey, I can offer these services. But at like some point I would imagine other people are starting to see the success you have and in general, like, hey, I can do that. I want to do that. I want in on this market. Did you have to shift anything or come up with any sort of unique strategies to stand apart from these people? Like more of, hey, I was like the first one here doing this kind of thing, or what that might have been?
Yeah, I think, look, it's always good to be first. So it's always good to be the first ever personal training center. But to your point, like people move your cheese pretty quickly if you're not careful, right? So it's like, it doesn't matter if you're first if you're not relevant anymore. And so I think for us, one thing that we did a pretty good job of and still do is just sort of look ahead, like what's next, like what's the next evolution of this, and it doesn't even have to be at the expense of the brand promise, right? So I'll give you an example. So we were doing personal training, and originally, as most people listening would understand, personal training was one to one, meaning like I'm one coach with working with one client. So one-on-one personal training is a common term used in our industry. We did that until probably the year 2000. So the first 8 years of our business. Now, what would happen was, Joe, maybe you're coming in and you're like, hey, I have a buddy that I went to high school with that now lives in the area. Like, can he come in with me? Like, it'd be cool to work out as friends. I'm like, sure. So he comes in. Now we're all having more fun, as it turns out. It doesn't take away from the workout. If anything, it adds to it. I could still privately program for both of you guys. You can do different things. You pay less, the gym makes more, the coach can make a little more. I'm like, that's interesting. And then maybe you guys are like, hey, we got a guy we golf with on the weekend. We want to bring a third. It's like, okay, right. Now you all pay a little less. You're all having more fun. There's more accountability because there's like a group to be accountable to beyond just the coach. And there's all these great things that were happening. So in the year 2000, which is really early for this play, we were like, you know what? Like that's where things are headed. And we basically just ripped the Band-Aid off. Now, at the time, we're doing 3,000 one-on-one sessions a month. So we have a killer business, right? And we pivot away from that, which is a huge opportunity or risk and opportunity cost to go away from that to basically start servicing personal training in a small group setting, which for us, I think at the initial time was like up to 4, right?
Mhm.
And then eventually till now up to 6. So we've been doing this unique product offering for 24 years now. Crazy, right? And it looks really simple, but it's nuanced. And when you do it for a quarter of a century, you get pretty good at it. So I think then the technology evolves and the tools around what we do evolve, the science evolves, the equipment, the training protocols, all of those things. And so there's always been competition, but I think the way that I heard it put, which I really enjoyed, was I'm aware of my competition, but I don't want them sitting at my boardroom table when I make my decisions. And what I hear when they say that is like, listen, I just need to I need to be aware of the landscape of what we're doing, but I also just need to keep my head down to a certain extent and just do what we do better than anyone else, right? If we just do that, there's always room in the market for that. And so certainly someone can move your cheese and you need to climb. It's like like my job as a visionary is to climb the tree every now and then and make sure we're chopping wood in the right direction, right? It's like, oh, we're going the right way. And then climb back down and say, yeah, keep going, or no, pivot to the right, whatever that is. That's my job. But if I do that every now and then, 99% of what we do is just trying to get better at what we do. not so much worried about like, who's coming or who's doing what, or it's like, that's just a waste of energy, I feel, right? And so I'm aware of my competition. I'm not making my decisions based on what they're doing. And thankfully, because we got started so stinking early, we've been way ahead of most folks just through trial and error, just time in the trenches, right? And so that's been our big advantage thus far.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you because you did mention equipment, right? And being so you've seen the evolution, right, of where we're at to now with machinery and where you were back then. I would imagine there's maybe a pressure or maybe it's just like, oh, this is a cool gadget. We need these things. But point being, some of the equipment you see out there, cutting edge and this and that, sort of becomes worthless. Maybe it was like a trend at the time, but you have to decide, okay, I'm going to employ some capital or deploy some capital into these machines that could be deemed worthless, right? If it turns out that this is just another, like I said, trend that people just get away from. How do you sort of weigh that approach at that level as you're growing, as you're established, as you're, like you said, 3,000 appointments a month to spend money on not cheap things to keep your gym up, in terms of who wants to stay at your place, then again, not to worry about the competition, but to move over to the competition because they have these shiny new objects.
Yeah, I think, certainly now that we're in franchising, you see a lot of concepts and their entire brand is based on a piece of technology or a single modality like a bicycle or a rower or something like that. And I never quite understood that. And I'm not saying that those aren't relevant offerings or whatnot, I don't know, but I would hate to be in a franchise where the thing that I purchased falls out of favor, right? Like it's not popular anymore for whatever reason. Like, as an example, like spinning or indoor cycling, right? I've probably seen that come and go 4 or 5 times since I've been in business. It's like really hot and then it's not, and then it's really hot and then it's not. Well, if you're sitting on a brick and mortar business that just does that, you certainly don't want to own it in the not phase, right? And so the good thing about personal training is that it never, like, specificity and accountability never goes out of style. And so it's like, okay, first of all, any tools or, processes or technology we can adopt behind our brand promise without disrupting the brand itself because it's not based on those things, right? Which is great. So, if somebody's like, hey, what do you think about this? And it might be a franchise based on an interesting new piece of technology. And I'll be like, if we really liked it, we could bring it in and it would run behind our brand promise. It would be like another tool in our tool belt. And if it was proven to be irrelevant or what have you, then we would throw it out and get another tool, but it wouldn't have to throw out the entire brand, right? It wouldn't be at that expense. That and the fact that I'm on a speaking circuit with the top strength and conditioning coaches and exercise scientists in the world. So I'm the business guy. Everyone else is like a consummate technician and amazing at what they do. And so if something comes about that looks relevant, I can reach out to these guys and be like, hey, is this legit or not? And they can tell me in terms that I barely understand why it may or may not work for people, right? And it's not just does the thing work, but does it work in our environment? Is it scalable? What's the customer experience around it? Is it fun to use? Does it make you feel silly? Like, there's a lot of things that you have to consider when adopting like new, certainly exercise technologies. So we have certainly evolved from machine based to more what's called functional fitness, which is like moving your body in space. Our customer avatar is 45 to 65. They want to live a great life outside the gym as well and continue to be young and as long as they can. And that type of training, again, it manifests itself much better outside the gym than just sitting on a machine, which doesn't have a lot of functional crossover outside the gym. But if machines became the thing and the best scientists in the world were confirming that, I could easily adopt those. So I think it's a set of lenses, Joe, that you put on that says, okay, will this produce the results that we want, right? Is it going to be at the expense of our brand promise? Is it scalable? Is it a nice customer experience? Does it work? Does the science prove it? And then it's great to be defensible when someone asks about a new technology or what do you guys think about this? What do you guys think about that? I'm like, well, listen, I mean, it might be great. I'm not seeing it in the best of the best in the world aren't using it. They're sort of saying maybe not so much. So I wouldn't adopt it. And if I did like it, I would adopt it. And it would sit behind our brand promise. So it wouldn't have to be the entire, you know, offering, if that makes sense from a service standpoint. So anyway, I know it's a lot of words, but does that make sense? That's sort of our lens on adopting new technologies around workout apparatus and gear is like, maybe, like, let's see what the best scientists in the world are saying about it because they're usually on the cutting edge because they're working with the highest paid athletes in the world. If it works, we'll use it. But if it doesn't, it won't. And it might be popular. And if it goes out of style, like we always joke about, like, hey, if we find out that kettlebells cause cancer, we won't use them anymore. But like right now,
Sure.
we're good. And as soon as we do, great. But it's just a tool in a tool belt. It's not the whole brand, right? The whole brand isn't like alloy kettlebells. That's
Right.
not what we do. And I just want to get you in the best shape possible in the most effective way that I can without hurting you. Like, period. That's it. And whatever tools I need to do that, I'm going to use them.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think when you're kind of getting started, I would imagine you did mention Avatar a couple times. You said 45 to 65
That's
or
our
so.
that's our main avatar. Yes.
And when you're, what, 22 at the time, I'm guessing you maybe didn't have that avatar in mind. Like, if you did, that's awesome. Cause right. It hasn't
I mean,
changed,
it
but
was the
like,
same then as it is
yeah,
now, really.
that's
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
like,
That
it's just based on financial threshold. Like, who can afford personal training?
sure.
It's an expensive service that requires a lot of just, disposable income. Who are those people? Well, they typically have lived long enough to rub a few nickels together. They've amassed a little bit of wealth. And so it's kind of been the same avatar for me the entire time. Now, granted, we've had some customers that started with us in 92 that are still with us. It's funny, I ran into a lady in the grocery store parking lot who's been working out with us, I think, 28 years. Now, she started in her 50s, so now she's in her 80s. And she finally won like client of the month, I think. So she's like, I finally got it after 28 years. I'm like, oh, awesome. Well, maybe you'll win it again. She's like, I'll be dead. I'm like, okay,
Ah,
good talk. It's like, but I mean, it's really about the financial requirements to be able to afford personal training. That pushes us older in the age category. And so it's also an underserved customer avatar. So when you look at who are we going to target, like you need to be unique. I mean, there's a lot of fitness franchises. Most of them are class based and target 30-ish year old people that are already relatively fit. Big names to be like your Orange Theories or your F45s or, the people that everyone's heard of, but it's just a reskin version of the same thing. So we didn't approach franchising lightly. We had 2,500 door fronts that we were servicing from India, Dubai, everywhere as a license. And that was white labeled. So we had a lot of market research. I sat on the board for some of the largest fitness franchises, overall franchises in the world. So we got a peek under the covers of how franchising works. We had worldwide market testing, right, for where were there real gaps in the market. Just so happens that the thing that we were best at that we'd always done really well was personal training in a small group. That's a unique service offering that we perfected. And the customer avatar that we're going after, 45 to 65, I mean, people over 50 hold 70% of our nation's disposable income. Like, that might be a good crowd to chase with a high end service, right?
sure.
And so, like, all the stars sort of aligned. And so we had to, again, like pivoting from a one on one personal training business and going to training people in a small group was a risk. Pivoting away from a 2,500 door front business, right, that paid really well as a license and then going into full franchising. And the difference is, like, now it's got our name on the front door and it's a standalone brick and mortar. And that's a huge opportunity risk to do that. So we didn't take it lightly. We needed to really be sure there was a gap in the market. We opened a couple of pilot facilities 6, 7, 8 years ago, make sure that we could dial the thing in perfectly. And it was a long road to get there. But yeah, that was our customer avatar in 1992, and it still is today. And it's just based on financial thresholds for what folks can afford.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's amazing. You ran into this lady that's been with you that long. You
I
know,
know. And
that's
she's still there. Like, our corporate gym, was in this. I'm sitting in the same building that we opened in 92, by the way, which is wild. I mean, I've
okay.
probably walked through the front door millions of times. So I can imagine, like, from college until now. We moved the facility around the corner, like the actual clientele, because we need the corporate facility for training new franchisees and hosting discovery days and things like that. But yeah, every now and then I'll run into some clients that I've seen that, I mean, I've got customers that I had before I even opened my first gym that are still with us. Isn't it wild for that long? So, and you look at, like, hey, what is a personal training, like, what is our brand really about? It doesn't take a lot of customers to get a decent return on investment. So it's a small number of people that you can have very intimate relationships with, and it's really a retention model. Where a lot of fitness is just like, you're basically a sales and marketing company that services fitness because you're churning out so many people, and then you're having to replace so many people. You churn out 40, you sell 50, and you net grow 10 every. It's like, that's the game. Whereas with us, it's not that way at all. Very low churn level, relatively low number of clients. So once you get to capacity, it's really just about servicing people really well, like just doing fitness, right? So it's kind of fun to do the thing that you're in the business to do and not just be all sales and marketing. So we do end up keeping people quite a lot longer than most brands.
Yeah. Was your background in college? Were you trying to go into like a business major, or I should have asked you that before?
I started in exercise science, and then I soon realized because personal training was a relatively new thing, a lot of people that were in my major either wanted to be sort of, college strength coach, go that route, something in athletics, or they wanted to be personal trainers. And I'm like, well, I'm already a personal trainer. And, I opened my own facility. So I'm like, well, I need to pivot to business. And then it doesn't take long studying business to realize like these people don't know anything about business. And I'm not saying, I mean, there's some general principles there, right? But I'm basically at this point, like, all right, if I can do it, I'm going to be a lifelong entrepreneur. I can remember sitting in a class about hiring Joe, and the guy's giving out all these principles. I had just hired like 8 people, right? And so he's giving out all these principles, and I'm thinking, and I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not that guy at all. But, I'm listening to this. It's like, oh, this is what you do, and this is how you hire people. And I'm like thinking, that doesn't sound right at all. So I asked him, and I didn't mean it the way it might have come out, but I'm like, have you ever owned a business? Like, have you ever actually hired anyone? I'm just curious. Like, what was your experience? And he took offense to it, as I see now, maybe why he would. And he said, well, no, have you? I'm like, yeah, I just hired 8 people like last month. And of course, everyone in the room's like, looking at me like, who the hell is this guy? I'm like, I got this little business I'm trying to run over here. It's like, and so you soon realize that, yeah, while pivoting to business was probably the right move, I still didn't learn anything, in the classroom that was actually, because I was doing both things at the same time. So the contrast between like actually running a business and learning the principles of business, if you're not going to be a nurse or a doctor or whatever, I'm not sure, man. I don't know. Like, you got to be dead set that you're going to be an entrepreneur, though, because it certainly helps to open doors for you if you don't have them open. But I didn't learn a whole heck of a lot in either exercise science, certainly my first few years, or business that really helped me at all. I just had to get out there and do it.
Yeah, I think that that's most people would agree. Getting out there and doing it's going to be infinitely better than sitting in a class listening to, again, a lot of times people who've never done what they're teaching you to
Right.
do.
Like, in theory, this is great. I'm like, yeah, that will never work. That does not work at all.
Because I'm doing it as we speak, right?
Exactly. I just did it last month. It did not look like that at all.
But was there like a mindset shift for you as from 92 over the years, right? That you start to become like, okay, yeah, I'm into this yeah. Now I realize this is a business. I need to become like a leader in this industry. I need to really just be like on top of my game, not just putting customers through the door, but in this industry. Like, was there a certain point that you reached where that kind of clicked?
Yeah, when we pivoted from the one-on-one model to personal training people in small groups, obviously now we're 8 to 10 years in. So like a lot of people had followed suit, and there were not a ton, but there were facilities dedicated to just that service now. And so it was still novel on like the large health club level. And so people were still like, what do you do? That's really interesting. You have a whole facility that just does this one service? It's like, yeah. And so when we pivoted to small group, it was even more unique. It's like, how do you train people, and how do you train 3 or 4 people and still give them a personal training experience at a much lower cost than what they would hire a one-on-one trainer for? And so it put me on a circuit, Joe, where I was speaking to the industry. Now I would just tell our story. Here's how we started. We had a little bit of a hiccup. We came back. We pivoted to this small group model. Here's what the margins look like. I would just lay the whole business model out. And it was so well received that then, people would start asking like, oh, can we buy your sales system, or can you teach us how to do programming for different people in one group? And, again, we've just been doing it for a while. And so I kept getting the same questions over and over with these consulting gigs. And so eventually we're like, well, why don't we just wrap this up and put it onto some type of a platform, and then we can just sell it, right? Because the questions are very similar, the same questions over and over and over. So it's like, all right, well, I can answer the same question with a permanent solution that I can monetize. And that became the birth of like speaking, then a lot of consulting, and consulting became licensing. And of course, licensing then became franchising. But it was a slow, long evolution. But it was really, to your point, the get out in the industry part wasn't something I had my eyes on or any ambitions to do. It was just through going to a couple of trade shows and talking to people that they were like, that's really interesting. Can you come and talk to my group? Or we have this little roundtable that we run with 20 people in it. Can you come speak to those guys? I'm like, sure. And that just led to a lot of consulting and then more speaking gigs. And pretty soon I'm, doing 30 talks a year all over the world and keynoting these big events. And it was like, all right. I mean, it's like, I feel like I'm the accidental, entrepreneur where it's like, okay, like they have to come in and beat me over the head with it, Joe, and be like, oh, this is great. Can you do this? I'm like, that's a great idea. Sure. Because everyone's like, did you have this in mind the whole time? It's part of your master plan. I'm like, nope, not at all. People had to literally come in the door and beat me over the head with it. And I'd be like, okay.
That's cool though. I mean,
No vision at all, right? Just
yeah.
plugging away.
Yeah, but that's, you all on the job experience and training and just growth, right? So you decide, right, you're going to start franchising. Now, is that something where you've been in it long enough to where you're like, it's just a natural next progression? Or is it like, oh man, I don't know. This is kind of my baby and I'm not sure how I'm going to trust the integrity, branding this thing at all these different locations that it's going to have the same, again, the integrity of the Alloy brand.
Yeah, I think we had done enough, licensing, which was sort of franchising light, white labeled, but we still powered it, right? And so like word got out, like we've got, 100 plus people or so that have alloy tattoos all over the world. This is before we even went to franchising. Like, I mean, inking the logo and the name on their skin, I don't know how much more brand loyal you can get than that. Just because they had had such great success with the type of things that we were deploying into these clubs that were then giving to these end users, the customers, right? So we had some brand recognition. Like I said, I sat on the board for these giant franchises. So there was a lot that went into, licensing was franchise light, upfront fee, ongoing support in some way, shape, or form, very similar mechanisms to franchising. And so it wasn't really about like, there's a risk in like letting other people put our name on the front door because we were kind of already out there, even though it was white labeled. People did know of our brand, powered by Alloy kind of idea, right? So it really wasn't as much that. The reason that we went to franchising, we felt like it was the right time because eventually we had so many other franchises coming to us for help. And a lot of them were now in the boutique space, which is where we are, which is like, again, single service or whatever. And it's like, geez, we've been powering all these other franchises. Like, if we're going to power people just like us, we should just do our own thing, right? And we had had a few people make a run at buying our licensing company because it was a really decent company. And so it became readily apparent that the enterprise value of a license company is nowhere close to the enterprise value of a franchise company. And so if we're already powering with at least partial parts of other franchises and it's scaling well and it works, it's like, well, we should really do our own thing. So if we're going to put all this effort into like powering these other, we should just do our own because their enterprise value is much higher. And we knew that based on the attempts to acquire us from other organizations. And they were good, relevant offers, but you could tell weird things like, oh, Rick, we need a 5-year earnout, which means I'd have to work for them for 5 years as an example. And it's like, well, that means they really don't value your thing that much. They just want the intellectual property and then they want you on the team, right? It's like, ooh, I'm pretty much unemployable at that point. So I'm like, all right, that's not going to work. So anyway, we took all that information and kind of looked at the landscape. Did we have the right thing built to fill the right gap in the market? And it's a big risk. I mean, look, it's very expensive to go to franchising. It's expensive to pivot away from what was a great business to do it. But so far it's early innings and it's going really well. But those are all the factors that we use, like enterprise value. Are we ready? Do we have the right thing built for the market, right? Do we have enough money? Because franchising is obscenely expensive from start to like making money is like, it could be a long, years long, year and year, multi-year gap to fill financially. So if you're not powered by VC money or something, you better have, some deep pockets and some savings, which we did. So yeah, lots of things to consider, but we didn't take it lightly, but it turns out it's so far so good. It's been the right decision.
Yeah, I mean, for you, like, I believe it's on your website. There's a survey I think on your website that highlights like self-employment, and that leads to, I believe, it's increased happiness, improved work-life balance, and reduced stress levels. So, for you, like, how do you personally relate to those sentiments?
I don't know who wrote that, but they are out of their mind. I'm just kidding. Reduce stress levels? What are they talking about? No, I think so. I mean, look, at the end of the day, like, entrepreneurship, I often describe it, it's a self-help journey disguised as a business, meaning you're only going to take your business as far as you can grow personally, period. Right. Remember earlier we touched on like, skill level and opportunity vehicle, right? It's like, okay, well, earn your way into a better opportunity vehicle. So I couldn't have gone, I don't think, in 98, I'd been open for 6 years, like straight to franchising. I wasn't ready, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people are, and that's how they start the business. And maybe they have franchise experience in a different arena or, a different brand or something. Good for them. I was not that person. So for me, I needed to earn my way into it, right? And so I think that's it really in a nutshell is like, listen, it just over time upskilling, and then that gives you the opportunity to get into these better opportunity vehicles. And right now that's franchising.
Yeah, so franchising for you. Now, is it this sort of a situation where you said you guys are still going to be hands-on, or they'll be like owner operators? How does that business model look?
Yeah, most of our franchisees would be on the investor level. And so what that means is they're buying somewhere between 3 and 6 is the average that they're purchasing. And they have a development schedule. So let's just say, to keep it simple, like one a year or something like that. Usually when they have 6, it accelerates towards the end because they've done it multiple times and it gets easier. And then we provide a ton of resources. Like we help them find real estate. We help them negotiate the LOI. We help them with the lease. The location criteria is very specific for our avatar. So we've got the whole country mapped out. Like, these are the home run areas. And this is your search area. And this is your protected area once you choose a location. And we've got final say on that. So we don't want you put in the wrong spot. Resources for hiring. I mean, all those dots are connected, right? For us. And so, yeah, I mean, look, it's a monster. It really is. It's a beast at times, but it's a really good vehicle for success. And I love it. And, I love entrepreneurship. That's something I've grown to love. To your point about freedom and stress, it's like I love to grow and learn and stretch myself. And like, I don't think I'll ever get tired of that. I think I'm more, my team always jokes, they'll tell people that if they come to Discovery Day or for training, they're like, you're never going to meet a more stoked CEO than Rick, because that's true. Because I love entrepreneurship, because it's like it's like almost like self-improvement disguised as a business. I love it, right? I mean, heck, I teach entrepreneurship at a local college. It's awesome. So that's my favorite thing. And then I've got lifelong pursuit of fitness. And now they're in the same vehicle. Like, I mean, I just hope to impart on anyone that buys an alloy or is awarded an alloy, that you can wake up every morning and put your feet on the floor and it's like you've never been more excited. And I've felt that for literally 32, now going on 33 years. And it's only more now than it's ever been, which is nuts. You think I'd be over it or bored or tired or whatever. Not at all, because there's so many evolutions of it, right? And the stakes get higher and the returns are higher and the risk is higher. But you're ready for it by then, because you have upskilled yourself. You've built, you have stoic control of your emotions. You're resilient. You're risk tolerant, all the things. And so it's just a journey, man. It takes a long time. But to say it's stress free is not true, but your tolerance of stress is different. I can't imagine the way that I'm wired, because I've only been an entrepreneur. I've never had like a job. I can't imagine like working for someone, you clocking in, going to a cubicle, commuting downtown, which could take 2 hours, and then clocking in and then just doing a job for somebody who maybe you respect or don't. And I don't know, man. I couldn't do it. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. We have plenty of people that have been on W-2s that are looking to get out of it and get into, entrepreneurship, which is why, again, they're investing at like 3 to 6 locations. They're then hiring fitness people to run the businesses. And yeah, they're in there and they're supporting them and they're looking at the metrics or whatnot. They're just not servicing revenue. They're not personal trainers. So we're not selling to a lot of owner operators. It's really hard to scale that way. And to be honest, most personal trainers can't financially qualify to buy the franchise anyway, just as a whole. So it would make it much harder to scale if we were selling to, technicians as opposed to like people on the investor level. And we built it knowing that. So we built it to be as simple as possible and tons of resources into how to hire, how to identify, hire, and lead really good people to run your businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, you seem like such a very positive, just a positive person when it comes to business in general. And I would do what you love and to just every day, like you said, for 3 decades. How did someone like yourself with your, again, positive mentality handle 2020 and the pandemic? And I know here in the States, obviously we had, different states had different protocols and blah, 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 blah. But of the challenges in your career with this company, was that one of the biggest that you kind of went through?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I shared this sentiment with some other entrepreneur friends of mine, certainly in the fitness space. So to your point, we were lucky to be in the state that we were in. But entrepreneurship is really problem solving, at the highest level at times. And certainly, like, no one ever seen anything like COVID. And for some people, it was devastating, catastrophic. Restaurants, certainly in the state that you're in, it was really difficult. It really changed our path because we launched franchising at the end of 2019. And like the first month, we awarded like 8 locations. I'm like, oh, this is like the easiest thing ever. Candy from a baby. Like, we're going to kill this, right? And then it was like, I think it was like January. And then, of course, February rolls around, the whole world catches on fire. It was interesting because we still were servicing our licensing revenue, and we had a like predicted churn rate each month. And then we had a growth trajectory budget for franchising, and they were going to intersect perfectly, Joe, at this one juncture. And then this would get bigger and this would get smaller. And of course, all that went out the window because the churn in licensing was exponentially faster because like so many businesses couldn't pay us because they weren't open. And then obviously franchise sales and development was like nothing. There were states that weren't allowing any fitness. So like no one was buying fitness if you were buying a franchise in those times, you were buying like home services because everyone's stuck at home and they're redoing their deck and their roof and all that kind of stuff. And so those type of franchises were killing it. And we were not. And so we put all sales on hold until like mid 2021. So we went like a year and a half for the first franchise without any real activity. And so, yeah, very, very challenging. And I would say, weird, twisted entrepreneurial way, it was kind of pleasurable. And I know when I say that, there's people that might have gone out of business that just want to tell me to take a hike, right? But at the same time, it's like you talk about problem solving at the highest level, right? Whether it's be finances, your team, managing expectations, managing fear, like what are you going to stand for as a company, if anything at all? Political climate was wacky at the same time. And so sometimes just choosing to be open was somehow making a statement to some people that was so much further than you just trying to help your local community and do your best as a business, right? So it was a wild time, but in a really weird, twisted way, I really enjoyed it because it was like, okay, this is problem solving at the highest level. This is where if you have any leadership skills at all, you're gonna bring them all to bear, right? If you do have any. And so we fared decent. We really did. Partly because in the state that we're in, our brick and mortar corporate locations could get back open relatively quickly. Again, though, it was challenging, right? There were people that weren't coming in, and thankfully we had a right tech solution so we could pivot to like some online personal training for people that didn't want to come into the gym. So I loved it. I loved the fact that it was like this, this is it. Like it's the whole world's going through it. We're all trying to solve the same problem. Can you be a better problem solver than your competitors, as an example? I'll give you an example. In that during that time, no one was spending money on marketing because everyone was like, we're not. Why? We can't be open, or our customers are nervous, and we took the opposite approach. Like, all right, it's like buying stocks. Buy low, sell high. Everyone does the opposite because they can't control their emotions. So for us, it was like, well, once we were allowed to be open, it's like there's a cohort of people that are still going to come into the gym, right? Mask, not mask, distancing. We tried to do all the things, but there are people out there who are like, I'm still going to work out because that's healthy and that's something good for me. And it's like, well, let's just market. So we were probably the only fitness concept in our market that was just pouring tons of money into digital ads and we got tons of traction because there was no noise. No one else was doing it, right? So again, problem solving at the highest level, risk tolerance, all the things. Like I really enjoyed it, man. And I know that sounds really weird, and some people probably hate me for hearing that, but for me, it's a sick pleasure in trying to solve like the biggest problem that I'd ever had in my business.
Yeah, I mean that's again, you're kind of rising to the occasion. Right? You're saying, okay, here's the climate I'm in. I love the analogy of like buying low, selling high. Because that's kind of what you were doing with the digital ads. I mean, people. I mean, for again, state by state, yeah, we all had different protocols that we had to go through. But now I think we can all agree, exercise is still a good thing, no matter what is going on outside.
Yeah,
So
especially now in hindsight. Now
yeah,
it's not even you're not even ostracized for saying it would be a good idea to be as fit as possible if something like this was to pop up again. That would be the one controlled thing that you have that could really help you, right? Mitigate some
mhm,
of the downsides of these type of things. So I think it's okay to say that now, right? And
absolutely.
in hindsight, that's definitely the truth.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I could not agree more. How about like lessons learned, right? From 92 through today. What are some of the biggest, lessons you learned just taking on this whole journey in your life?
It sounds so cliche, but things are never as bad as they seem. They're also not as good as they seem. And so really it's about, I hate to say it, but it's really about stoic control of your emotions. There's Jim Collins coined this term for something he called the Stockdale paradox, and it was based on James Stockdale, who's also a fan of the Stoics, and he was the highest ranking prisoner in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. And so he was a pilot who was shot down, and he's the highest ranking guy, so he's going to get the most torture, the most scrutiny. And he always had this really interesting lens. He was being interviewed by Jim Collins, and he said, like, who fared best, right, in the prison environment? He's like, well, how did you do so well? Because he ended up doing really well. He's like, well, I knew like ultimately this was going to turn out to be a great story for me, and I would do great things with the results of this horrible, you know, event, right? But I also was well rooted in the fact that like until that time when I do believe ultimately that I'll get out and I'll make it, but until that time, it's really gonna suck. Like it's gonna be awful. Like I'm gonna receive unimaginable tortures, and I don't know when or how or when we're gonna get out. And that's always been my lens. But ultimately, I knew not only would I survive, but I would do something great because of it, right? So that was the paradox. And then this follow-up question was like, who didn't do well? And he goes, oh, that's easy. That was the optimist, right? And those are the people that like, surely we're going to be out of here by Christmas. I just know it, right? And sure, Christmas would come and go, no news, and they would literally be broken. And it could kill them in some cases, because I mean, sometimes the hope was all you had to keep you going, right? And so just really interesting. I think same for me in a lot of ways. I mean, not as like extreme examples, nothing like that. But at the same time, I think, you learn to have those stoic control of your emotions where like don't get too excited. Sort of like Warren Buffett said, like it happened during COVID, people were overextended, right? Like, oh, things are going great. I'm gonna open 10 more gyms. It's like, okay, wait a minute, like maybe, right? And he has that famous statement, like, you never know who's swimming naked until the tide goes out. Well, the tide went out, and a lot of people didn't have any pants on because they had overextended themselves thinking it was always going to be great. It's not. It takes just as much discipline to hold back a bit when things are crushing it as it does to push when things are hard, right? And I think you need both of those skill sets. So I would say in hindsight, that was probably the thing that I wished I had learned earlier on, right? And the thing that now I have a relatively good grasp on. And it just keeps you out of the wild emotional fluctuations up and down. It allows you to keep a level mind, to make rational decisions. So I would say of all the lessons I've learned, like stoic control of emotions is probably the first one. I'd say for your whole life, honestly. It keeps you out of trouble, keep you from making bad decisions, right? Like that's a real skill that you can learn over. It's like a muscle, right? To use an on the nose analogy with fitness, it's like a muscle. Like you work it out, it gets stronger. Same thing with your emotions. You can do the exact same thing with those. And it's not about getting in a cold plunge and a sauna and all those things. Like that's all great, but people doing that, they already like doing that stuff anyway. It's about doing stuff that's really hard, right? And doing it even though you don't want to, and then doing it again and again, and then you just learn to control it. I think that's a valuable skill, not just for business, but for your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, you're definitely one proof of growing this thing so huge from where you started with franchising. What do you see? Like, what's the future? I mean, for Alloy. I mean, I'm sure you're just as excited for the next 30 years, right? What do you envision for the future of Alloy?
Well, when we first started, our goal was to have 800 locations in the lower 48 states by 2030, which is a pretty lofty goal. But on our current pace, Joe, we'll get there way faster than that. So that's our goal, 800 locations in the lower 48. And then obviously somewhere along that journey, because we have really good international contacts as well, is we will take Alloy certainly to areas that make sense, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, places like that. And we've had a lot of international experience, at least helping other people build coaching businesses when we were a license and we were white labeled. So we know it scales, we know it works. And so I think the main objective, though, because there's so much runway left in the US, is just to do that. And then as other opportunities pop up for international expansion, we'll do that at the same time. So yeah, I mean, that's the goal. And so far, we're way ahead of pace to do that. So it's just about keeping it on the rails, right? Sales are brisk. So we have to get the clubs open. We have to get them making money. And that's how we make money. And that's not easy, but it's not lost on us either. That's what we have to do. So it's just blocking and tackling and staying disciplined. And like we talked about, all the other things we talked about on the call.
Yeah, the execution, right?
Yeah, that's it. It's not fun. We call it the 20-mile march. That's also a Jim Collins thing where it's like,
Yeah.
I think it's based on two Arctic explorers that were racing to the South Pole, and it was Scott and Amundsen, and Amundsen was Norwegian, I believe, and Scott was British, and they kind of started at the same time. It was like first to put the flag in the South Pole, right? And Scott used a like surge and stop technique, right? Like, okay, weather's decent today, we're gonna go as hard as we can, right? And then the weather's bad, we're just gonna stay in our tents because there's like hurricane force winds and freezing. And Armandson was like the 20-mile march guy, like no matter what, like we're going 20 miles. If it's sunny, we're going to stop early. If it's, blustery or whatever and terrible weather, we're going to push through, right? And Armandson ended up getting to the South Pole first with that strategy. And then he ended up getting his whole crew back alive, where Scott, like almost all of his crew perished. And they might have all perished on the way back. I can't remember the story exactly, but and then so Jim Collins termed that the 20-mile march, which was like the get up every day, do the thing again, discipline not to overextend yourself, discipline to work through when things are tough, right? And those are the companies that typically perform much better in the same category than the other companies. They just do the basics really well every day. And so that's what we're trying to do right now.
So, and how about for people who, again, you're in Georgia, but you're kind of going everywhere. So for people that want to learn more about Alloy, what are the best places to follow, the company and you to learn more about Rick?
It's Alloy Personal Training. We're all over social media. Rick Mayo. I mean, I'm everywhere. I think it's Coach Rick Mayo on Instagram, Facebook. I mean, we're everywhere, really. TikTok, you name it, and LinkedIn. But just to find out more about the company and the franchise, just go to alloyfranchise.com. And then there's a link there if you want to hop over to our consumer site, look at some of our locations and stuff, you can do that. If you want to learn about the franchise there, if you just fill out a form on the site, some people just fill it out and say, hey, I listen to podcasts with Rick and Joe, and I just want to ask Rick a quick question. It's like, I'll be happy to help you if I can, right? If it's something I can answer, I'll do it. So that'd be the best place to get a hold of me, or just ping me, DM me on social media. I'll try to help you there as well.
Yeah, man, this has been awesome. Just learning how much just from 1992 to today. It's like, it feels like you're just kind of getting started,
It does, man. I feel like a total rookie, and I enjoy that too. Like, if you like learning, it's nice to be just over your skis like all the time, right? It's like, that's how I
Yeah.
feel right now. But I really love it, and it's every day's new, and every day's a learning experience, and it will hope to always move that goalpost, Joe, and I hope that for you too. It's like, that's I think what it is, right? You learn and you grow, and then you move the goalpost, and you learn and you grow, and I'll do that till I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's very inspirational just to listen to you, man. So thank you for sharing that story and just so many just interesting tidbits and of information for people to kind of take away from this. So I obviously highly recommend people connect with you online. And again, thank you for your time today to do the show and just all that you've been doing and learning from you. So thanks again for your time today, Rick.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Joe. Great interview, man. Awesome, great questions, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Experience Curve. Please take the time to share this podcast with a friend or colleague to help get the word out about my show.